In my 35 years on this bench in Providence, Rhode Island, I have read thousands of documents, police reports, medical records, financial statements, letters from teachers and priests and neighbors vouching for someone they believed in. I have read things that made me angry and things that made me proud and things that confirmed every fear I carry quietly about the direction of the world. But I want to tell you something right now, my friends. I have never, not once in 35 years, had to stop reading a document because I could not see the words clearly anymore. Until the morning, a 14-year-old boy named Daniel walked into my courtroom and handed me something that broke this old judge wide open. If you've ever believed that children are our most important responsibility, stay right here with me and subscribe to this channel right now, because what I'm about to tell you is the most important story I've shared in a very long time. I need you to understand something before I begin. This courtroom, Providence Municipal Court, it is not a place where children typically appear. We handle parking violations, traffic matters, small civil infractions, the machinery of the law at the level most ordinary people ever encounter it. And that is exactly why what happened that morning was so unexpected. Because when a child enters this space, when someone that young walks up to this podium, everything changes. The air changes, the weight of the room changes, I change. And I changed the moment I saw Daniel. Subscribe to this channel right now if you believe that how we treat our children defines who we are as a people, because that belief is at the absolute center of everything I'm going to tell you today. Let me take you back to that morning. It was a Wednesday, early spring, the kind of Providence morning where the cold is still fighting the warmth and the light comes through the courthouse windows at an angle that makes everything look a little softer than usual. Quinn had come in early, and he often does, and had already organized the docket by the time I arrived. I remember he was quieter than usual. Quinn is not a quiet man by nature. He has a presence, a steadiness, an energy that I've come to rely on across more years than either of us likes to count. So when he's quiet, I notice. I said, "Quinn, what's going on?" He looked at me with that steady gaze of his and said, "Judge, there's a situation on the docket today that I think you need to know about before we start." I set down my coffee. "Tell me." He said, "A boy, 14 years old. He came in yesterday afternoon with his mother to request a hearing. The matter involves his father's vehicle, but Judge..." And Quinn paused, which he almost never does. "The boy asked if he could submit a written statement to you directly. He wrote it himself by hand last night. He dropped it off at the clerk's office this morning before school." I looked at Quinn for a long moment. "How old did you say?" 14. A 14-year-old boy, awake last night writing something by hand, dropping it at the clerk's office before school. I want to tell you what that image did to me before I'd read a single word of what he wrote, because that image alone, a child that age, taking that kind of initiative, that kind of responsibility, told me something essential about who this boy was. It told me he understood that what he was doing mattered, that the words he chose would matter, that this moment required his best effort. That is not nothing. In fact, that is everything. If this is already moving you, leave a comment below and tell me, because I want to know that these stories are reaching you. These children, these families, they deserve to be witnessed. Quinn handed me the statement before the session began. It was written on 3 pages of lined notebook paper, the kind with the red margin line on the left, the kind that takes me back to my own school days in Providence, the days when my father would sit at the kitchen table and help me with homework in his accented English, patient and proud and completely convinced that education was the one door that opened all the others. The handwriting on those pages was careful, not the careless scrawl of a teenager rushing through an assignment, deliberate, each word placed with intention. The name at the top, Daniel Reyes, age 14. I read the first paragraph standing up, still in my chambers, still in my street clothes, and I had to sit down. I am going to tell you what Daniel wrote. Not all of it. Some of it belongs only to this courtroom and to the people it concerns. But enough. Enough for you to understand why this old judge, who has built 35 years of professional composure, had to pause on that bench and collect himself in front of a full gallery and a camera and the entire apparatus of the court. But before I do that, I need to tell you about the case itself, because the case is the frame around the painting, and you need to see the frame first. The ticket in question was issued to a vehicle registered to a man named Roberto Reyes. Roberto was Daniel's father. The vehicle had been parked in a restricted zone on a Tuesday afternoon in February during school hours, accruing a $75 violation. The ticket had gone unpaid for 6 weeks, which is why it had escalated to a court appearance. Standard procedure happens dozens of times a week in this courtroom. What was not standard was that Roberto Reyes would not be appearing in court that morning. What was not standard was that his 14-year-old son would be appearing in his place, accompanied by his mother, Carmen, who had taken a half day from her job at a laundry service on the west side of Providence to be here. And what was absolutely not standard was the 3 pages of handwritten notebook paper currently sitting on my bench, which I had not yet been able to finish reading. Hit that like button right now if you believe that children who take responsibility deserve to be met with equal seriousness. Because Daniel Reyes walked into my courtroom that morning with more moral seriousness than most adults I've encountered in 3.5 decades on this bench. Let me tell you what I saw when he came through the door. I want to be precise about this, the way I try to be precise about everything that matters. Daniel was not small for 14, but he carried himself with the careful posture of someone who is used to trying to take up the right amount of space, not too much, not too little. He was wearing his school uniform, dark pants, a light blue collared shirt, clean white sneakers. His hair was neatly combed. He was carrying a backpack that I could see was full, a school day's worth of books and materials, because he had come straight from first period with special permission from his principal, a fact I would learn later. His mother, Carmen, walked beside him. She was a small woman with strong hands. I noticed her hands immediately, the hands of someone who works physically, who knows what effort feels like in the body. She was dressed neatly, carefully, in the way that people dress when they want to show respect for a place even when the place intimidates them. She held a paper coffee cup that she wasn't drinking from, just holding, the way people hold things when they need something to do with their hands. And Daniel walked up to that podium and looked at me directly, not defiantly, not nervously. He looked at me the way someone looks at a person they've already decided to trust, which, when you think about it, is the most vulnerable thing a human being can do. I looked back at him and I said, "Good morning, Daniel." He said, "Good morning, Your Honor." Clear voice, steady. I thought, whoever raised this child did something right. I looked down at the case file in front of me. Then I looked back at Daniel and I said, "Daniel, before we discuss the matter before us today, I want to acknowledge something. You submitted a written statement to this court. I began reading it this morning." I paused. "I want to finish reading it here with you present if you'll allow me to do that." Something moved across his face, a flicker of something. I would call it courage gathering itself for what came next. He said, "Yes, Your Honor, that's why I wrote it." So I picked up those 3 pages of notebook paper, and I began to read, out loud, because this boy had written something that deserved to be spoken into the air of this courtroom, not just processed silently as a procedural document. And this, my friends, is where I have to ask you to stay very close with me, because what I read changed the temperature of the room in a way I have felt very few times in 35 years. If you're watching this with someone, reach over and touch their arm right now, because you're going to want them present for this moment. And if you're watching alone, I want you to know that what you're about to hear is the kind of thing that reminds us why human beings are worth the effort of understanding. I started at the beginning. Daniel had written, "Your Honor, my name is Daniel Reyes, and I am 14 years old. I am writing this letter because my father cannot come to court, and I want to explain why, and I want to explain about the parking ticket, and I want to say some things that I think you should know." Already I could feel the gallery settling into a particular kind of attentiveness. The shuffling stopped. The murmuring stopped. People were leaning forward. I continued, "My father, Roberto Reyes, has been sick since last November. He has cancer. It is in his lungs. The doctors at Rhode Island Hospital are treating him, but he has bad days where he cannot get out of bed, and the day of the parking ticket was one of the bad days. He asked me not to tell people because he is a private person and he is proud, but I am telling you because I think you need to know the truth, and because my father taught me that you should always tell the truth even when it is hard." I stopped. I looked up from the paper. Carmen, beside her son, had pressed her lips together tightly. She was not crying. She was holding herself together with the specific strength of a woman who has been holding things together for a long time and has become very practiced at it. Daniel was looking at me steadily. I looked back down at the paper. I said, "Daniel, I'm going to keep reading, and I want you to know that everything in this letter is being heard." He nodded once. I continued. "The day of the parking ticket, my father had a doctor's appointment at Rhode Island Hospital. He usually takes the bus because we only have one car and my mother needs it for work. But that day he was too weak to take the bus, so I asked my mother to let me drive with him. I cannot drive. I'm 14. I sat with him while a neighbor, Mr. Carvalho, drove us. We parked in the wrong place because my father needed to get inside quickly and we didn't have enough time to find a legal spot. We were only inside for 40 minutes, but when we came out, the ticket was already there." I turned the page. "I am writing this letter because I want to pay the ticket myself. I have been saving money from shoveling snow this winter and doing yard work for neighbors. I have $62 saved. The ticket is $75. I need $13 more, but I want to ask if I can bring the rest next week when I have finished the 2 yard jobs I have scheduled. I am not asking you to cancel the ticket. My father would not want me to ask for charity. I am asking for 2 more weeks to pay what we owe. My friends, I have to stop here and tell you something because this is the moment. Reading those words, my father would not want me to ask for charity. This is the moment when my throat did the thing it sometimes does. The tightening, the thing I've learned to manage over 3.5 decades but have never been able to eliminate entirely. Because in that sentence, written by a 14-year-old boy on lined notebook paper at some point the night before, I heard my own father's voice. My father, Judge Caprio, who came from Italy with nothing, who worked in Providence his entire life, who once told me when I was not much older than Daniel that the only things a man truly owned were his word and his dignity, and that a man who protected both had everything he needed. My father would not want me to ask for charity. That sentence was not just Daniel's father's voice. It was my father's voice. It was the voice of every immigrant, every working family, every person who has ever understood that self-sufficiency is not just practical. It is moral. It is the way you honor the people who sacrificed so that you could stand on your own 2 feet. I had to pause. I set the pages down for just a moment and I looked at the ceiling, in which I almost never do on the bench, but sometimes you need a second and you take it, and I collected myself. When I looked back at Daniel, he was watching me with those steady eyes, and I realized he understood what was happening. This 14-year-old boy understood that he had written something that had reached me, and he was not embarrassed by that. He was waiting. Share this video right now. Please, share it for Daniel. Share it for every child who has had to grow up faster than they should have, who has had to carry weight that belongs to adults, who has done it anyway with grace and dignity and their father's voice in their head telling them to tell the truth and not ask for charity. Share it because this story deserves to be heard by every person you know. I picked up the 3rd page. I said, "There's more." I began to read the final page, and this, my friends, I want to prepare you, though I'm not sure any preparation is adequate. This is why I am telling you that I couldn't finish reading this letter on the bench. Not because it was tragic, but because it was true in the deepest possible way, and sometimes truth is so concentrated that it requires a moment before you can continue. Daniel had written, "The last thing I want to say is this. My father is the best person I know. He came to this country from the Dominican Republic when he was 22 years old, and he has worked every day since then. He taught me to be honest and to work hard and to be kind to people. He coached my soccer team for 4 years, even though he worked double shifts. He reads to my little sister every night, even on the nights when he is tired from treatment. He makes my mother laugh. I am afraid of losing him, and I do not say that to make you feel sorry for us. I say it because I want you to know who Roberto Reyes is, because he is more than a parking ticket. And I think in your job you probably see a lot of people who are more than whatever brought them to your courtroom." That last sentence. I think in your job you probably see a lot of people who are more than whatever brought them to your courtroom. A 14-year-old boy wrote that sentence. I set the pages down, and I could not immediately speak. I am not going to pretend otherwise. I sat on this bench in Providence, Rhode Island, in front of a full gallery and a camera crew and my staff and a 14-year-old boy who had come straight from school in his uniform, and I sat with that sentence for a moment that felt longer than it probably was. Because in 35 years, in thousands of cases, with thousands of defendants and thousands of stories, no one had ever said that to me quite so clearly. No one had ever articulated the core of what I try to do every single day in quite those words. And it came from a child. It came from a 14-year-old who had been awake the night before with lined notebook paper and a pen and a father fighting cancer and a $62 savings account and a moral compass so perfectly calibrated it put most adults to shame. Inspector Quinn behind me was very still. I didn't need to look at him to know what his face looked like. I could feel it. The gallery was absolutely silent. Carmen had turned her face slightly away, and her shoulders were moving in the small, controlled way of someone crying without wanting to be seen crying. And Daniel was looking at me, patient, present, 14 years old, and completely present to this moment he had created with nothing but honesty and courage. I said, "Daniel." He said, "Yes, Your Honor." I said, "How long have you known about your father's illness?" He said, "Since December. He told me himself. He said he wanted me to hear it from him." I said, "And how are you doing? Not your father. You." He blinked. I don't think anyone had asked him that recently. You could see the question land differently than he'd expected. He said, "I'm okay, Your Honor. I'm trying to be." I said, "Let me ask you something. Does your father know you're here today?" And here is where the unexpected happened. Because Daniel's expression shifted in a way I hadn't seen yet, something that was almost a smile, but softer. He said, "He knows I requested the hearing. He doesn't know about the letter. I wrote that after he fell asleep last night. My friends, I want you to feel the weight of that image. A boy at his kitchen table, his father asleep down the hall, asleep after a day of treatment, a day of fighting. And this boy, 14 years old, writing 3 pages in careful handwriting about his father's goodness, his father's sacrifice, his father's dignity. Not because anyone told him to, not because it was assigned, because he understood, with a moral intelligence that humbles me, that his father deserved to be seen, and that he was the one who had to do the seeing. If this is touching your heart, leave a comment below. Tell me what you felt when you heard that. Tell me about your own father if he was someone worth writing about. Tell me about the people in your life who are more than whatever difficulty brought them to anyone's attention. I want to hear from you. I always do. Now let me tell you about my decision, because I am a judge, and the case before me was a parking violation. And I want you to understand how I think through these moments, because I think it matters. The process matters, not just the outcome. My first obligation is to the law. The parking violation was real. The ticket was legitimately issued. A $75 fine is what it is. The fact that the circumstances were sympathetic did not mean the violation didn't occur. I believe in the law. I believe in accountability. My father believed in paying your debts. Daniel himself had written that his father wouldn't want charity. So I could not simply wave my hand and make it disappear as though it had never happened. That would not have been just. And more than that, it would not have honored what Daniel himself had asked for. He hadn't asked me to dismiss it. He'd asked for 2 more weeks to finish paying it himself. He had $62 already saved from snow shoveling and yard work. $62 earned by a 14-year-old through physical labor in a Providence winter, set aside specifically for this responsibility. What am I going to do with this boy? This extraordinary, infuriating, heartbreaking, wonderful boy? What I am going to do, I decided in those few moments of silence on the bench, is honor him exactly as he deserves. Before I tell you what I decided, I want to say something to you, my friends, about what moments like this teach me about justice. Because this is not just a story about a parking ticket, it is a story about what we owe each other, what we owe children who are watching us, learning from us, absorbing their understanding of how the world works from the way we treat their families. Daniel Reyes had come to my courtroom because his father taught him that debts must be paid and truth must be told. What he saw in this courtroom was going to become part of his understanding of what justice looked like. And that responsibility, the responsibility of being the adult that a child is watching and learning from, I have never taken it lightly. I straightened. I looked at Daniel, and I looked at Carmen, and I said, "Mrs. Reyes, I want to say something to you before I address the matter of the ticket." Carmen turned fully toward me. Her eyes were red at the edges, but her gaze was direct. I said, "You have raised a remarkable young man. What he wrote, how he wrote it, why he wrote it, that reflects the values that were put into him. Some of that is his father, and some of that is you. And I want you to know that this courtroom, this city, is better for having people like Daniel in it." Her chin trembled. She said, "Thank you, Your Honor. He is a good boy." I said, "He is better than good, Mrs. Reyes. He is exactly what we hope for." I turned to Daniel. I said, "Daniel, I've been doing this for 35 years. I've read a lot of documents in that time, but I want to be honest with you. Your letter is among the most important things I've ever read in this courtroom. Not because of the legal arguments. You didn't really make legal arguments. You made something more powerful than that. You told the truth about who your father is, and that is a gift that very few people know how to give." Daniel's jaw tightened. I recognized that, the jaw tightening when emotion is being held back. He said, "He deserves it." I said, "He does. And now let me tell you what I'm going to do." I looked at the file. I looked at the violation. I thought of my father. I thought of Roberto Reyes reading to his little daughter on the nights when he was exhausted from treatment. I thought of $62 saved from shoveling snow in a Providence winter. I said, "Daniel, you came here and asked for 2 weeks to pay the remaining $13. You told me your father would not want you to ask for charity, and I respect that deeply. I respect it because I was raised the same way. So I'm not going to give you charity." I paused. "I'm going to dismiss this violation entirely. And I'm going to explain to you exactly why, so that your father understands that this is not charity and it is not pity." The gallery stirred. That particular stirring, not surprise exactly, but the intake of breath that happens when a room of people exhales together. I continued, "The vehicle was parked in a restricted zone because a man who was too ill to take public transportation needed emergency access to medical care. The time in violation was 40 minutes. The circumstances were documented in a communication to this court by the man's son, who came here in his school uniform on a weekday morning, having saved his own money against this debt and submitted one of the finest pieces of moral writing this courtroom has ever received. Dismissal is appropriate, not as charity, as justice." I looked at Daniel. "Do you understand the difference?" He said very quietly, "Yes, Your Honor." I said, "Say it back to me." Tell me the difference." He thought for a moment. Then he said, "Charity is when someone gives you something you didn't earn. Justice is when someone recognizes what's true." I had to breathe through that. 35 years on the bench and a 14-year-old in a school uniform had just given me the cleanest definition of justice I had ever heard. I said, "That's exactly right. Go back to school, Daniel. Tell your teachers you were in court this morning understanding justice better than most law students." The gallery laughed, the warm, full laugh of people who needed relief from the weight of the last few minutes and were grateful for it. But then Daniel said something that stopped the laughter gently, the way a hand placed softly on someone's shoulder can stop motion without force. He said, "Your Honor, can I ask you something?" I said, "Of course." He said, My father, when he finds out about this, he's going to feel like it was charity. He's proud. It's hard for him to receive things." Daniel paused. Is there any way you could write something he could read, so he understands what you just said to me, about it being justice, not charity? My friends, I am going to tell you something. In 35 years on this bench, defendants have asked me for many things, but no one had ever asked me to write something for their father so their father could understand. No one had ever asked me to use my words to protect someone's dignity in the privacy of their own home. And the fact that this request came from a 14-year-old boy who understood instinctively that his father's pride was as important as the legal outcome, that understanding, that level of emotional intelligence at 14, I had to pause again. That's twice in one morning. For anyone keeping count, that is a record in 35 years. I said, "I will write something for your father. I will write it today." And I want to tell you, my friends, that I did. That afternoon, between sessions, I wrote a letter to Roberto Reyes. I told him that his son had appeared in my courtroom with more grace and dignity than most adults I encountered. I told him that the dismissal of his ticket was not charity. It was the court recognizing that the law exists to serve justice, and justice had been served by acknowledging the full truth of his circumstances. I told him that he had clearly done something very right because the boy he raised was a young man this city could be proud of. And I told him, and this is the part I want you to hear, I told him that his son's letter had reminded this old judge, who sometimes needed reminding, exactly why he had chosen this work 35 years ago, because that was true. It was simply, plainly true. And if that truth is landing somewhere in you right now, subscribe to this channel and share this video, because these stories, Daniel's story, his father's story, they belong to all of us. They are reminders of what we're capable of. They are proof that courage and integrity are not qualities that belong only to adults or only to people with power or resources. They live in 14-year-old boys on the south side of Providence who stay up late with lined notebook paper and write the truest thing they know. Now let me tell you what happened afterward, because there is an afterward, and it matters. About 3 weeks after Daniel's court appearance, I received something in the mail at the courthouse, a card. On the front was a simple image, a sun rising over water, the kind of generic card you find in a drugstore. Inside, in handwriting that was larger and less controlled than Daniel's, the handwriting of someone whose hands were not entirely steady, were these words: "Your Honor, my son told me what happened in your courtroom. He also gave me your letter. I read it 3 times. I am not a man who cries easily, but I cried, not because of the ticket, because of what you said about Daniel. I know my son is a good boy, but when a man like you, with your experience and your position, says it, it becomes more real. It confirms something I have been afraid to fully believe while I have been sick, which is that I have not failed, that what I tried to give him took. Thank you for that. It means more than I can say. God bless you. Roberto Reyes." I sat in my office and I read that card, and I thought about what it means to be a father, what it means to lie in a bed fighting for your life and to wonder, in the quiet hours, in the dark, whether the things you tried to give your children actually reached them, whether the values you lived, the sacrifices you made, the words you said at kitchen tables and on soccer fields and in bedrooms during bedtime reading, whether any of it got through. Roberto Reyes didn't need me to answer that question. Daniel had already answered it in 3 pages of notebook paper in a Providence courtroom at 8:30 in the morning on a Wednesday. I keep that card in my desk. I keep it next to Daniel's letter. On the hard days when the docket is heavy and the problems feel too large for the tools available to me, I sometimes open that drawer and I remember what is possible when a person, any age, decides to show up with their full honest self and tell the truth and trust that the system will receive it with the seriousness it deserves. That is the compact, my friends. That is the compact I try to honor every day on this bench. Every person who comes through that door and trusts this courtroom with their truth, they are owed the full seriousness of my attention, not just procedure, not just process, full human attention, the kind my father gave me when he sat at the kitchen table and helped me understand things, patient and present, convinced that what I had to say mattered. I've been doing this for 35 years, and I will tell you honestly, there are cases I remember vividly and cases I don't remember at all. The ones I remember are not necessarily the most dramatic or the most legally complex. They are the ones where something essential about a human being was visible to me clearly, where the window was open and the light came through without obstruction. Daniel Reyes gave me that. He walked in with every window open, nothing hidden, nothing managed or calculated, just the pure truth of his family's situation and his father's character and his own extraordinary integrity. What do you do with something like that? You receive it, you honor it, you let it change you slightly the way all true things change you when you allow them to. Let me ask you something, and I am genuinely asking, and I'm not being rhetorical here. If you were sitting on this bench that morning, if those 3 pages had been placed in your hands, what would you have felt? What would you have decided? Leave it in the comments. Tell me. Tell me about the moment the words hit you, the line that got through, because I want to know which part of Daniel's letter reached each person watching this. That conversation is part of why this channel exists, and I take it seriously. Now, I want to say something about children, about what we owe them, because this case, more than almost any other in recent memory, crystallized something for me that I carry as both a judge and as a grandfather. Children are watching us. They are watching how we treat difficulty. They are watching what we do when the rules meet reality. They are watching whether the adults around them mean what they say about honesty and integrity and dignity, and they absorb everything. They absorb our hypocrisy as readily as they absorb our wisdom, which means the standard we have to hold ourselves to, the standard I have to hold myself to on this bench, is the standard of someone being watched by a child who is deciding what kind of world this is. Daniel Reyes had watched his father. He had watched Roberto come home exhausted and still read to his sister. He had watched him coach soccer on double shift days. He had watched him make his mother laugh. He had absorbed every bit of that, and it had become him. It had become the boy who shoveled snow all winter and saved $62 and wrote 3 pages in the night about his father's goodness and dropped them at the clerk's office before school. That is the most powerful testimony to Roberto Reyes's character that could ever be offered. Not his work history, not his tax records, not his neighbors' testimonials. His son is the testimony, and I said as much in the letter I wrote to Roberto. I said, a man's greatest accomplishment is not what he builds or earns or achieves, it is who he produces. And Roberto Reyes had produced Daniel. That was his evidence, that was his record, and it was immaculate. My father believed the same thing. He didn't talk about it in those words. My father wasn't a philosophical man in the formal sense, but he lived it. He was present and consistent and honest, and he produced 4 sons who understood what those things meant because they had seen them in practice every day of their childhoods. I am sitting on this bench in Providence, Rhode Island, 35 years into this work because of what my father modeled, because of the man I watched him be. That is the inheritance that matters, the only inheritance that truly compounds across generations. I think about Roberto Reyes fighting his illness with that same inheritance at stake, the inheritance he is passing to Daniel and to his daughter through every day he chooses to show up, to read at bedtime, to make Carmen laugh. That is not nothing, that is everything. And I think about Daniel, 15 now perhaps, maybe 16 by the time you're watching this, growing up in Providence with that courtroom morning in his history, with the knowledge that he walked into a system that can feel cold and impersonal and transactional, and he was met with full attention, that the truth he brought was received, that his father's dignity was honored, that justice, when it works, looks like that. I hope he remembers it. I hope it becomes part of how he understands the world, that honesty is worth the risk, that showing up matters, that systems are made of people and people can choose always to see each other. God bless you, Daniel, wherever you are now, in whatever classroom or soccer field or kitchen table or future you're building. God bless you. You reminded this old judge of everything that matters. And Roberto, if by some grace this story ever finds you, your son showed up for you in the most complete way a child can show up for a parent. He carried your name and your values into a courtroom, and he represented you with such honesty and love that this court had no choice but to honor it. You are more than whatever brought you to anyone's attention. You always were. My friends, this channel exists because of moments like this one, because stories like Daniel's deserve to be heard beyond the walls of one courtroom in Providence, Rhode Island, because justice, real justice, the kind that remembers there are human beings inside every case, is worth celebrating and preserving and sharing. If you've been here with me through this whole story, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Subscribe if you haven't yet, because every week brings another story, another person, another window into what this city and this country are made of at the human level. Tell me in the comments what moved you most today. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that goodness is real and it is present and it is being practiced right now by 14-year-old boys with notebook paper and $62 and more integrity than they know what to do with. Take care of yourselves. Take care of your children. Tell them the truth and let them see you living by it, because they are watching, and what they see becomes who they are. God bless you all. And stay with me, because I promise you, nothing could have prepared me for what arrived in my courtroom the very next week. You will not believe who walked through that door and what they brought with them. Subscribe and stay close. This story is just getting started.